Well, hello there. Brandon here, coming to you from the gallery in the studio today. This is going to be another paint along with me video here on a small canvas. If you've seen some of my other work, you see I've done some other ruby-throated hummingbirds. There's one back there hanging on the wall now. It's on a little bit larger canvas, but this time we're going to do a paint along on a small 6x8, since I haven't done one of those yet for the channel. If you want to paint along with me with this one, let's get started. Okay, so what I have here is a 6x8 canvas, another little small canvas project here. We're going to do a paint along on a hummingbird. I've got one or two of their hummingbird paintings videos out there on the channel if you want to have a look at them, but not a paint along with me version of it, so we're going to do that here. I have a basic pencil sketch in of the hummingbird. I have a little basic pencil sketch of whatever animal or wildlife thing that I'm going to be painting out there, just to give me an idea of what the composition is going to be. And I have an idea now of where I want to put what colors on there. This is going to be a a ruby-throated hummingbird. Those are a native hummingbird to South Carolina that doesn't necessarily migrate in and out. So South Carolina being where I'm at, that's one that I choose to paint a lot of. And I'm going to start with a wash brush again to do this background here. If you've seen some other videos, you'll probably be familiar with this process. This is a 3/4 inch wash brush. And I'm just going to be putting a background in of some color here that's going to be just a blurry, faded out, distant background of some colors here. And since we're doing a nice festive bright hummingbird scene, I'm going to keep these colors fairly bright and festive as well. So I'm going to go into some titanium white, and maybe we'll just go in with a little touch of yellow to begin with, and come in here and start with some color. So we'll put a little bit of yellow in there. And I'm going to go into maybe a little bit of red, so we get a nice little pink going on out here as well. And maybe go into just a hint of blue with that, so we can start getting kind of a transition into some purple up there maybe. And this is just whatever colors makes you happy. We're going to say that maybe there is some kind of flower field of going on out here with all kinds of different colors and blooms happening in the background in the distance. We don't know what's going on back there, and ultimately it does not really matter what's going on back there. We're creating a sharp foreground image here of a hummingbird, and he will pop against whatever just blurry, faded colors we make. And that's the look we're going for. We're looking for our hummingbird image to really contrast against what we do in the background. Now I've got a little bit of magenta on my palette here that I'm going to throw in there as well. If you don't have a magenta, it's okay. You can stick with pinks, with reds and whites and whatnot. I'm throwing some magenta in there for a little bit different flavor. And again, I'm keeping a lot of this kind of in a pastel looking range because I'm putting a lot of titanium white with it. I don't want anything real dark here. So I'm lightening everything up. So like I've got a color transition here from that kind of yellow over to what I was doing with that blue and magenta to kind of make that fade happen. I'll just kind of drop some white right in there. Work white into both directions. That way we won't have to worry about what kind of color mix we get with yellow and magenta and all that stuff mixed together. You just put white in there and fade it all together and it's fine. Now once you've got a background that you're fairly happy with, I'll go ahead and let that dry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come in here now and let's just add a couple of flower things going on. My hummingbird's facing that direction. He's kind of looking in this upward, so I'm going to drop in a couple of these kind of trumpety looking flowers that come down. Since I got a lot of kind of pastel-y looking colors here, I'm going to go with a nice purple on these flowers that are coming in. So I'm going to start with a darker shade of purple. And you know, you can use reds and blues here. Magenta's good if you've got some magenta. I'm going to create a deep, or should I say a dark purple value to start out with, to come in here and essentially create my darkest colors of my flowers first, and then come back in and highlight on top of them. I'm using a little 1/2 inch angled brush, and let's just come in here and drop in like I said, I'm going for these kind of trumpet-shaped tube-looking flower things that are hanging down here. I don't even know what these are, but I see them a lot in photos. They have a little bit of a flared end to them, and they're just kind of a tubular-shaped flower body, I guess, as it moves back. And they usually are hanging in clumps, and apparently hummingbirds are probably liking them a lot, so any nice bright flower that gets their attention is good with them. Alright, now that we've got our dark forms down there of our flowers, I'm going to go into a little bit of titanium white in that mix and lighten it up just a tad bit to start doing some highlighting on them. We'll come along the edge of it and add a little bit of that lighter highlight color. And then maybe another pass of it somewhere down the center. Just makes these things have a little bit of dimension to them. Now I'm going to go into even more titanium white and use just the tip of this brush to create some edges along the tips of these little folds along the top end. And I'm not trying to spend tons of time on these flower details. I mean, I want some nice darker colors and some crisp lines here and there to make these things pop against the background like our bird will, but I'm not worried about great detail on these things, just enough to get the point across that yeah, there's some flowers here. Our hummingbird is essentially the main attraction, but this is kind of the second thing that's going to get your attention here, so we do want to give it a little bit of highlight. Maybe we'll say that this bottom flower is more turned towards us a little bit, so we're going to create a bit of a edge with some white highlight here. But then I'm going to go back into dark purple again and create the other side of that particular flower like that. And then we'll go back into some white there to highlight that out on the other end. Back there on the back. Alright, I think I've done enough for the flowers. Now we'll just get to the main attraction here, which is our hummingbird. We'll start with that same 1/2 inch angled brush here to block in a lot of the base colors here that we're going to be dealing with. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on with my little 1/2 inch angled brush here and just drop in some of the darker colors in the areas that they belong. I'm going to draw in his little long bill there to start out with, just to give me an indication of where that's going to be. And then the top of his head, I'm going to go ahead and keep it fairly dark. We'll go with black, just a hint of green in with it. I'm going to keep putting this dark color in the areas that he has got the darkest feathers here along the base of this tail. Now this is a ruby-throated hummingbird, so I'm going to bring in red with a good bit of black into it to really darken that red up to paint an initial layer here of this area. Then we'll have our red highlight on top of it. Now for the majority of his body in here, he's kind of a grayish color with some of that green feather highlight mixed in it. I'm going to go into a fair amount of titanium white, put a little bit of black in it to gray it out some. And this area up here under the throat that's a little whiter, I'm going to essentially do the same thing, but I'm going to bring a little bit more white into it so it's not quite as dark as that area I just had. Now these wings, for the most part, I'm going to paint a little bit blurred lines on them, but you know, close to the body they're still going to be a little bit sharper lines. I'm going to bring in that darker area in here, right along the top of this one as well. And then I'm going to lighten that mix up with white again to give me a base of where that wing is going to be, and we'll create a little bit of a blurred line edge of that when it's all said and done, to make his wings look like they're in motion. Alright, I'm switching to a small, this is basically like a little number 4 Filbert kind of brush, just something small that you can get in here and work some little bit of detail with. It doesn't really matter what it is. You just don't want a huge brush for this, obviously, because we got to get in here some tight spots. So I think I'm going to start on the bottom end here and work my way up. So his tail back there, we just need to break up the monotony a little bit to make it look like it is indeed some feathers going on. We don't just want a black blob back there. So I'm going to go into that dark color initially and just clean up some of the lines. Now we just need to break up that color a little bit. I'm going to add a little touch of raw umber and titanium white together to give me a little lighter brown value, maybe just a hint of yellow with it as well. And I'm going to come along here and bring that color in along the tip of his tail. And again, I don't know how visible this will be on camera, but just know that we're breaking up the monotony of that all dark looking tail a little bit. I'm going to draw a little bit of a line of separation here between maybe some feathers. I'm going to use the tip of this brush and just take a little bit of titanium white on that mix, and that's about all we need for his tail. Now we're going to move up into this area here. He's got some white lighter areas in there. We're going to start out with that gray mix, but I'm going to add a good bit of white to it to lighten it up a lot. And we're going to come in here and create some shapes, some individual little feather looking shapes, or patches of feathers is probably more accurate to what's going on down there. And then back in the middle of that, on these hummingbirds, it's kind of a mixture of some green and some brown in there, and it's kind of hard to tell what's really going on. So I'm just going to go into those two colors, some raw umber, some sap green, mix them together a little bit. Right in the middle of these patches we just made, I'm going to bring some of that color in there. You can see I'm leaving, you know, spaces and gaps between it there, because there is some separation of things going on down in there. Now that green and black color moves all along this back as well, so more green in here. And some more raw umber mixed in as well. And just kind of splotch it in there. You don't want uniform anything going on here. It's a variety of things going on back there. And then we'll highlight it out with a little bit of white, brighten up our green a little bit. There's a little bit of a separation here from the top of that body, or back of that body I should say, in this front end, and we'll draw a little bit of a gray line in there to indicate that. Now this area in here we do kind of like we just did that bottom He's got some feathers that overlap and work their way down into this. And then we'll move into green, lighten it up with some white. We'll start up here above his wing and just start touching that color in, leaving some gaps. And then we'll come back, add a little bit of white to that mix, brighten things up a little bit, and drop some highlight in on the tops of some of those that we just dropped in there. Now in those in-between spaces, I'm going to go into a little bit of raw umber right into that mix I just had. So I just had that kind of lighter highlight going into a little bit of raw umber with it. And I'm going to tap the end of that into some of that negative space between my little green marks. And I'm going to add just a hint now of black to that to really darken it up a bit more. Start to tap that color a lot down into this area because it gets a little darker here as we roll along the bottom edge of his belly here. Now it's a matter of highlighting all that up, so we're going to add white back into our mix. Come in here and start to fade this gray down into it. And just tap that color in again into some of these negative spaces as you move up through where we've put in some of this green and this raw umber up in here. Now I think I want to carry that green down a little further. I'm going to go back into a little bit more green and bring it down a little further into here. Now up into here I'm going to go into almost pure white. It's got just a little bit of this green and brown on the brush we've been dealing with. I'm going to put a lot of white in here. And just kind of tap it down into here a little ways to kind of blend it in. So it's not a real sharp defined line between those two areas, but fairly close. Maybe tap it down into the belly a little bit. While we're working in this area here, I guess I'll go ahead and drop his little feet down in there. I'm just going to go into mostly black and a little bit of raw umber mixed in with it to create a little dark color here that we're just going to come in. And their feet, they usually have kind of tucked in when they're flying around like this, so we're just going to drop in a shape of where the base of that foot would be, basically in here. And then a couple of the individual little claws or toes or whatever you call them that will come back from that and just kind of tuck in. Doesn't have to be anything real specific there. And we will create a few little highlights on there, going into a little bit of white, maybe add a little bit of yellow ochre. That's about all we really need for those feet. Now you can add a little bit of flavor in here. These hummingbirds have some other colors that kind of come out. I'd like adding a little yellow ochre, and I mean not a bunch here, just put a little bit of yellow ochre, thin it out a little bit, water if you need to, and maybe some little white with it. And bring that color in, touch it in a few places. That color kind of comes through. It's in some places here along the base of this tail, a few places up here along the body. Just another element of color that we add in there to break things up a little bit. I think I'll go ahead and use that same color to start streaking out into some of these wings a little bit, so leaving some gaps in there. Add a couple of streaks of that color into those wings. Now to finish out that body, I'm going to move to a liner brush, and I'm going to go into some titanium white here, just a tiny hint of that yellow ochre. Just a couple of streaks in there. Also take that same color and do a few of those down in this area. A couple of streaks that are visible just to break things up a little bit, give you the illusion that there's some feathers going on in there. Same thing in this midsection. Define out some of these little individual areas here. Just adding little touches of highlight here to break up what would be feathers that are overlapping one another, making little lines here, little kind of horizontal looking, almost like a miniature little U-shaped line in there. Like I may go into a little bit of yellow and green to really make a brighter green here. Put a couple of little highlight touches of that brighter green and yellow in here. Alright, let's talk about these wings he's got going out here. Basically, we're just going to create a few things in here that show some separation and some lines, but we want to kind of blurry things out to make it like these wings are in motion. So I'm going to go into a little bit of that black and raw umber mix, add some white to it to here towards the bottom part of the wing. Let's get some separation of a few feathers in there. There may be some things going on up in here in this part. Now I'm going to lighten that up a little bit, add a little bit more white to it, and come back in there and make a few more lines. Now move away from my liner brush back to my small little filbert here, and we're going to, let's go back into yellow ochre, thin it out with a little bit of white, and now add a hint of black to that. And then we're going to come in here and drag this color through in a couple of places. And I'm going to carry one up here above where that wing is. I'll do the same thing over here. Now I'm going to go into some white that I'm going to thin out and add just a little bit of black to it to gray it out some, but I'm going to make this pretty thin. And then bring a few streaks of that in here as well. And what we are creating is that kind of blurry look that this wing is in motion, and we can't necessarily make out all the little details in there. We can see enough that tells us that, hey, there's a wing that's doing something. And I might, like you see there, I might even use my finger to smear some of that out a little bit. That way I don't have any sharp lines or edges in there where I'm trying to keep things a little bit fuzzy and blurry to the look. Now we just need to deal a little bit with this head here. So we've got this dark red that we're working with. I'm going to bring that dark red down a little bit onto that white. We don't want a nice straight line like I've got going on at the moment. We want to give us the appearance that those feathers are overlapping down in there a little bit. Now for the first pass here, I'm going to come into a little more red to that mix, and using the end of this little brush here, I'm going to start to touch in again little individual feather indications that are overlapping one another. Might not even be able to make that out on camera just yet, but you will once you start to lighten things up. I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow to that mix to lighten that up some, and do the same thing. Make them small marks up here towards the top, and then as you come further down the throat here, you can make those, put a little more pressure on your brush there, make those marks a little bigger. Highlight that out with some little tiny touches of yellow here and there on it. We're going to use the same technique along that head. We're just going to be using green for the most part. I'm going to come in here and drop in essentially what is his eyeball here. We're going to put a big blob of mostly black, a little bit of blue in there. Clean up my front edge a little bit. Let me go ahead and try to straighten up that beak as well. Now we'll run a little bit of white to gray out the top of that a little bit. Now we're going to work into some green, add a little bit of white to that green to brighten it up just a tad. And we're going to come in here and touch in the indications of these little green, little scaly looking feather highlights that he's got along the top of his head and around the back. Now bring a hint of yellow into that mix and brighten up some right in front of this eyeball. Define his eye out a little bit. We got a little bit of a lighter streak of something that kind of defines the back end of it right in there. Now we're going to take some white, some black to gray it a little bit, just a hint of blue as well in there to make a little bit of a shine on his eyeball. Thin it down a little bit. Now we just need to make a final highlight pass and we're ready to go. I'm going to go into a liner brush here for this final little detailing highlight pass. Try to straighten up his bill the best I can. Now come in with a little more of that white highlight that we're going to put on the top. Go into our little green mix here, light green, white, a little bit of yellow. Put in a few bright little last touches. Now I'm going to get some red to come down here on the throat. We're going to go into red, a little bit of yellow with it, brighten it up a little bit. If you hear a lot of fuzzy feedback noise right now, it's because it is absolutely pouring down rain on top of this roof here in my studio. So if you're wondering what that humming sound is that's coming through, it's pouring down rain. But I'm in the middle of doing this, so I gotta do what I gotta do. I'm gonna go into pretty much pure titanium white now. Put one or two little passes on this feathers down in here, just a couple of little streaks. And then I'm gonna thin out some black and touch up my little feet here. Draw them in a little bit better with my liner brush. Get me a little bit of white added to that mix now to highlight them out, gray it up a little. And maybe I will come in here with a little bit of that darker mix that I was drawing my feet with and define out his back a little bit there against that wing, just so we can see that a little better. I want to sharpen up this front edge of him here with a little white. That's a pretty good finished product there, I think. Got ourselves a little ruby-throated hummingbird there hovering. Hope you guys have got you a hummingbird that you're happy with. Again, like always, you can keep playing around with that and detailing it out to your heart's desire, but I'm going to call this one a finished product. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.